It is said that hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Now, I like to think of myself as somewhat strong for a young man, but I definitely was raised in good times. Like most of my generation, I don't really know how I would do if I were shipped off to war or had to start from nothing. But if social media overgratification and the forecasted economic downturn will have any effect on us, it seems we may be entering into a weak men, hard times situation. Even though it's hard to put a finger on exactly what it is, it's clear many have lost faith in our future and the world seems to be irreversibly changing, likely for the worst, and losing part of its soul.
There's like this depression and soullessness that hovers over this era.
That over half of young people agree with the statement that humanity is doomed.
So now that hard times are on the horizon, many are waking up to the fact that we are going to be needed, not as boys but as men, to fix any of the problems facing the world as well as the ones knocking on our own door. This calling or turning point from boys to men comes from us being tired of being simply entertained with life and instead seeking something much bigger, meaning. We want meaningful relationships, meaningful challenges, overall a meaningful life story. So the calling to manhood is double-edged. There is the collective call, the call of society to need strong men to take responsibility for making things better. And there is the individual call, the call every man must answer at this turning point in his life. If you're a young man today, it probably feels as if these two events, the global and the personal, are eclipsing and actually intrinsically tied to one another. In this light, it feels as if masculinity is a counterculture, a direct response to the emasculation and watering down of a man's responsibilities. So when we choose to embark on this calling to manhood, it is taken up by us, not as following the norm, but as seeing the destructive alternative and pitting yourself directly against that. So in light of the impending destruction of social, economic, and family institutions, the world will need us young men to answer this call twofold and to make our place meaningful and impactful. But this is not the first time this eclipse has happened. This story has played out and been represented many times before. So what can we learn from the great heroes of myth and reality who answered this call to manhood? Within The Lord of the Rings, one of the greatest stories ever told, we are provided with so many examples of great wholesome male heroes who answered this call. With one of the superior examples of authentic and true masculinity in pop culture is Aragorn, heir of Gondor. Immediately in this story we see not a king, not yet, just a protector of the land, a shepherd figure who uses his strength and wisdom to protect the weak, the hobbits, from powerful dark forces and guide them for part of their treacherous journey through Middle-earth. Aragorn shows us that masculinity is not the opposite of femininity, but rather sacrificial fulfillment of whatever role needs to be filled, as we see Aragorn not only as a warrior but also a healer throughout the trilogy. Overall, Aragorn is oriented to a higher calling, and is willing to sacrifice himself and his kingship as part of a larger fight against overwhelming evil in the trust that Frodo and others would fulfill their heroic roles within the story. In Dune 2, we saw a coming-of-age story where a boy was forced to answer the call and take on the responsibility of being a man in his situation. Paul Atreides watches as forces of consumption and limitless greed kill his father with the desire to eradicate the entire house of Atreides. And through growing up into his meaningful role as Lisan al-Gaib, Paul takes time to form relationships, learn the ways of the Fremen, and use his strength and status to end their suffering. Although Dune author Frank Herbert also wanted to portray more complexity and moral ambiguity throughout the story, we can still see a call to something greater and manhood being a necessary step to answer that call. But the only problem is that we are not Aragorn, and we are far from the Lisan al-Gaib.
We've all been raised on television to believe that one day we'd all be millionaires and movie gods and rock stars, but we won't. We're slowly learning that fact. We're very, very pissed off.
Fight Club exposes the fact that we are often more like civilians than heroes in our everyday existence as men. Because of this, the narrator has become emasculated, nihilistic, and oriented towards materialism, which rewards the idea that suffering is not an integral part of our lives. The creation of a somewhat toxic masculine alter ego and the development of a fight club forces the narrator to confront his impermanence and rediscover the natural drive of testosterone and aggression. From the narrator, we learn how necessary it is for a man to discover an authentic identity oriented to something beyond the material, which is a direct contrast to the watered-down modern conception of the masculine self. I think one of the best real-life examples of masculinity in recent times is Martin Luther King Jr. This is a man with unceasing commitment to a higher cause, racial equality, on the basis of a moral objective: all men are created equal. This is a man willing to risk his own well-being, even to the point where he knew his life was in danger, nonetheless marching forward, showing strength and unceasing perseverance in the face of the colossal powers that be. We can use him as an example of a man that showed realism towards the situation of his age, not inciting a race war which would only demonize him, but used intelligence and non-violence to expose the contradiction within American ideals. Within all of these stories are men who were paying attention, heard the call, and knew what they had to do when the moment called for it. So how do we know that we are in one of these moments now? Well, it all started with a justifiable push against the hyper-masculine, unfeeling men of the early 20th century. Men were expected to be shipped off and possibly die for their country without a feeling or second word about it. This is what the time called for, and these men answered the call. But it created lots of men that knew only how to be warriors but not healers, dominating but not generous. This caused real social problems, leading to the rise of third-wave feminism, which willfully swung the pendulum as far as possible the other way. Boys were given very little outlet for their natural aggression, and men were taught, as they still are, that they and their motivations are the cause of world problems. So a whole lot of men, after being criticized for their will to protect and provide, and told that any expression of their masculinity is toxic, did the obvious thing: nothing. Men, or really boys, became concerned with entertainment rather than attainment, forced to express their aggression or drive within meaningless or even harmful exercises, like video games or chasing one-night stands. And with the increase in dopamine abuse technology and sexual liberation, grown men were, and still are, able to get what they want without having to grow up or accept responsibility for their life. This has caused a variety of problems for our society, including the disintegration of families, social media attachment, rising suicide rates, rising male dropout rates, drug epidemics, and far more issues than we can address today. And this is all the while with many other somewhat unrelated issues just swirling around, all part of what feels like a large, overwhelming tide. Climate change, political division, economic downturn, failing job market, the loss of shared values, the list goes on. If you're a young man, anything like me, you've probably talked about these kinds of issues with your friends. Shout out to my cousin who actually sparked this idea, and you've seen that other men share in this sense of being overwhelmed. But instead of most men rising to meet these challenges, which I am arguing is necessary, many men are sulking in placeless despair and pursuing meaningless ends for their own sake. In light of this despair, nihilism, and placelessness experienced by modern men, new models of masculinity have sprung up to try and fill this void. Andrew Tate serves as a direct model of everything that feminists hate in men. He teaches men that they need to be aggressive and dominant, that winning at any cost is what is most important, and that multiple attractive women should be an accessory to your success, just like a Bugatti. He is a salesman who puts on a facade of living a very specific lifestyle that the primal part of every man dreams of. He even converted to Islam to justify having multiple wives, with a bunch of his idiot internet posse following suit.
So you want to say money doesn't buy happiness? Well, then you're saying you're happy to be a slave, because only money is going to give you freedom. So money absolutely is happiness, because freedom is a bare minimum requisite to happiness.
These things which Tate teaches men to want are shallow, and the way he teaches men to go about getting them is harmful to his followers and to everyone around them. It inadvertently teaches them that money and the material things that come with it is the highest thing we can achieve, to the point where relationships and moral convictions should be tossed aside in pursuit of this end. Men like his message because he teaches them to have strength, to command respect, and to want to do big things. And he's right that men should be strong, but he's wrong that strength is a vanity rather than a tool to protect others. And he's right that men should want to do big things, but he's wrong that these things should be done for their own sake rather than for a greater good. Okay, but what if we looked at a closer example of what positive and well-oriented masculinity looks like?
Responsibility. That's what gives life meaning. It's like lift a load. Then you can tolerate yourself, right? Because look at, you're useless, easily hurt, easily killed. Why should you have any self-respect? That's the story of the fall. Pick something up and carry it. Make it heavy enough so that you can think, yeah, well, useless as I am, at least I could move that from there to there.
Jordan Peterson teaches that one of the most defining characteristics of a good man is productive generosity. This means that a man must first be competent and even potentially dangerous. This is the Andrew Tate part of the equation. But Peterson also teaches generosity, which relates to the idea that a man's actions must have aim and higher orientation, usually oriented towards the benefit of our family or the people we are in various relationships with. One of his ideas that sticks out from the norm quite a bit is that a man must be a monster in some sense, but in taming or wielding his destructive power for some good, he then embodies valuable masculinity. He says that if a man must suffer, then he might as well face that suffering so others don't have to, and in doing so he can defeat the dragon and get to the gold, in the narrative sense. This narrative adventure of our lives is driven by our unceasing and unwavering commitment to truth and a higher purpose, which forces us to face a world of darkness instead of backing down from a fight. Many cultures, philosophies, and religions were aware of these truths and acted as guides for multitudes of men both past and present. From the early centuries following the foundation of Western thought and philosophy came the practice of Stoicism. Stoicism has shaped men through one very profound yet simple idea, summarized in this quote by slave-turned-philosopher Epictetus. Happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within your control and some things are not. What is in our control is our actions and what we use them for, not their outcomes or the situations which we find ourselves in, aka we control the means, not the ends. This way we can practice non-reactivity and equanimity, which prevents us from letting external events get the best of us emotionally and cloud our decisions. In the journal of philosopher King Marcus Aurelius, he elaborates on this and defines masculinity for us. It isn't manly to be enraged, rather gentleness and civility are more human and therefore manlier. A real man doesn't give way to anger and discontent, and such a person has strength, courage, and endurance, unlike the angry and complaining. The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. So masculinity means having a calm mind in stressful situations, and this, not aggression, is what defines our strength. The Stoics also preached the elevation of virtue over all other desires, and that our virtue should be oriented towards the highest good, which they called the logos. It takes wisdom to know the logos and find proper action within the current situation, courage to act out whatever is right despite fear and potential consequences, justice to treat others with respect, kindness, and to protect the weak, and temperance to resist temptations which cloud our judgment and distract us from the logos. See more on these 4 pillars and 7 core Stoic principles to help change your life in the video I made linked here. Even older than the Stoic philosophy and likely more impactful in our lives is the Judeo-Christian tradition. Within the Old and New Testament contains so many stories of great courageous men who trusted in God and did His will over their own despite insane odds. But greatest of all, there is the example of Christ. Even if you are not religious, you cannot deny the impact that the life, teachings, and actions of Jesus have served in setting a positive example for so many men and women over the last 2 millennia. In Jesus, we see an extremely kind man who lived among the rejected, the weak, and the sinners, and instead of being dominating or convictive, he had compassion and generosity for them, which brought out the very best in those around him. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Again, like in the case of Aragorn, we see a shepherd, a protector who sacrifices himself against forces that the weak do not fully understand and cannot fight on their own. Within Jesus, there is also the example of trust in God, the Father, and on this calling to a higher good, Jesus takes his strength and courage in the face of fear and says, "Father, not my will, but yours be done." So if you've been paying attention so far, you'll notice that through all these examples of great men, there is always an orientation of their actions to a higher cause. Without this, a man is like a car running on fumes. It may have the appearance of moving forward, but it can't take you anywhere worth going. Meaning is the fuel that drives men to do such extraordinary things and motivates them to keep marching on through the trials and suffering of life. The best advice I can give right now is to develop conviction. This means taking seriously the things that we say and do and recognizing that they define who we are as men. We must develop an authentic understanding of the world and act with discipline towards a greater good. With this in mind, we should pursue great accomplishments, success, and adventures, not for our own sake, but for the sake of others. Maybe this is our family, humanity, God, and probably all three. At some level, in order to have courage, we must trust that by acting with virtue, things will unfold in some beneficial way, even if we have no clue what's going to happen at that time. The young men of this generation should have faith in the long-term benefits that will result from acting with truth, discipline, and moral initiative in our actions. Nobody knows how the events of history will unfold, but we must trust that when we seek wisdom, act with virtue, and orient ourselves to others, the world will become a better place. Right now, the world suppresses masculinity, but it will return. It is returning. It will be in a slightly different form, but you wouldn't use the same key to unlock a different door. Masculinity has been changing across time and culture, in some ways helpful and in some hurtful, but certain virtues expressed in these timeless examples show what true masculinity is about. It's not for vanity, it's not for power, and it's not for any one thing in particular other than the highest thing. Masculinity is a solution for what the situation calls for, and that is why we need wisdom, to know what situation we are in and seek the greatest possible action. I've been trying to parse out and seek this wisdom via my YouTube channel, which I think can have a profound effect on turning this general tide of nihilism that we've seen throughout our society. I trust that my videos will get views and are creating a positive impact, but I would appreciate anyone who enjoyed this video to check out my other videos to best understand our greater meaning as humans and how we can become the best version of ourselves toward that end. So if you want to see more, then subscribe, leave a like to get this out to others, and leave me a comment to know what you thought. And as always, never stop questioning, talking, and thinking. Thank you.